The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Chen adjusted her scope for the 100th time that week. Her hands moved with practiced precision, each adjustment calculated to the millimeter. She had been training for this moment for 3 years, ever since the intelligence report first crossed Commander Jake Morrison's desk. Sarah wasn't like the other soldiers on the base. While they practiced formation drills and weapons maintenance, she spent her days perfecting the art of remaining invisible. Her specialty was patience, precision, and the ability to take a life from over 1,000 yards away. At 28 years old, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled snipers in the military, but this mission would test every skill she had ever learned. The target wasn't just anyone. 3 enemy generals had been coordinating attacks against Allied forces for months. Intelligence suggested they would be meeting in a remote compound in exactly 2 weeks. The location was heavily fortified, surrounded by mountains and accessible only through a narrow valley. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, but also the perfect place for a sniper to disappear into the landscape. Commander Morrison had handpicked Sarah for this assignment after reviewing dozens of files. Her psychological profile showed remarkable calm under pressure, and her shooting scores were consistently perfect. More importantly, she had grown up in similar mountainous terrain, giving her an advantage that couldn't be taught in any training program. The briefing room was cold and sterile when Sarah entered that Tuesday morning. Maps covered every wall, showing satellite images of the target compound from different angles. Red circles marked guard positions while blue arrows indicated possible escape routes. Commander Morrison stood at the front of the room, his weathered face serious as he explained the situation. The 3 generals weren't just military leaders. General Kozlov controlled supply lines that kept enemy forces equipped with weapons and ammunition. General Hassan coordinated intelligence networks that had compromised several Allied operations. General Wang managed recruitment and training programs that had doubled enemy troop numbers in the past year. Taking out all 3 in a single operation would cripple the enemy's ability to wage war effectively. Sarah studied the photographs of her targets carefully. Kozlov was a heavy-set man in his 50s with distinctive gray hair and a permanent scowl. Hassan appeared younger, probably in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes. Wang was the oldest, perhaps 60, with thin features and wire-rimmed glasses. She memorized every detail of their faces, knowing that in the field she might only have seconds to identify and engage each target. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah would infiltrate the area 3 days before the meeting, establish a concealed position on a ridge overlooking the compound, and wait for the perfect moment. Intelligence indicated the generals would meet in a conference room on the 2nd floor of the main building. Large windows faced the valley, providing clear lines of sight from multiple positions. Commander Morrison explained that extraction would be challenging. After taking the shots, Sarah would have approximately 15 minutes before enemy forces could organize a search of the surrounding area. A helicopter would attempt pickup at a designated landing zone 5 miles from the compound, but only if conditions allowed. If the extraction failed, she would need to evade capture and make her way to a secondary rendezvous point 20 miles away. Sarah's training intensified after the briefing. She practiced shooting at extreme distances in various weather conditions. Rain, wind, and changing light could all affect bullet trajectory, and she needed to compensate automatically. Her spotter, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, worked with her to perfect communication techniques. In the field, they would need to coordinate silently, using hand signals and prearranged codes. Physical conditioning became even more important. Sarah would need to carry all her equipment across difficult terrain, potentially for several days. Her pack would include her rifle, ammunition, food, water, camouflage materials, and survival gear. Every item was essential, but weight was critical. Too much equipment would slow her down, but too little could mean mission failure or death. The psychological preparation was equally demanding. Sarah worked with a military psychologist to develop mental techniques for maintaining focus during extended periods of waiting. Snipers often spent hours or even days in position before taking a shot. Boredom, discomfort, and doubt could all compromise performance when the moment finally arrived. Sleep patterns were adjusted to match the expected mission timeline. Sarah would need to be most alert during specific hours when the targets were likely to appear. Her body clock was gradually shifted so that peak performance would coincide with the critical moments of the operation. Equipment selection required careful consideration. Sarah's preferred rifle was a custom-built precision weapon capable of accurate shots at distances exceeding 1,200 yards. The scope was equipped with range-finding capabilities and wind compensation features. Each piece of ammunition was individually inspected and tested to ensure consistent performance. Communication equipment included encrypted radio devices that would allow contact with command and the extraction team. Solar chargers ensured batteries would remain functional throughout the mission. Emergency beacons provided backup options if primary communication failed. As the departure date approached, Sarah found herself reviewing every aspect of the plan repeatedly. She studied the terrain maps until she could navigate the area blindfolded. Weather forecasts were analyzed to predict wind patterns and visibility conditions. Enemy patrol schedules were memorized to identify the safest infiltration and escape routes. The night before departure, Commander Morrison met with Sarah privately. His expression was grave as he emphasized the importance of the mission. Intelligence suggested the enemy was planning a major offensive that could result in thousands of casualties. Eliminating the 3 generals might not stop the attack entirely, but it would significantly reduce its effectiveness. Sarah understood the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. 3 shots would determine the outcome of battles yet to be fought. Success would save lives and potentially shorten the war. Failure would mean the enemy leadership remained intact, continuing to coordinate devastating attacks against Allied forces. Her final equipment check revealed everything in perfect condition. The rifle was cleaned and calibrated, ammunition was secured in waterproof containers, and survival gear was packed according to priority and accessibility. Sarah's personal items were minimal: a photograph of her family and a small metal cross that had belonged to her grandfather. As she prepared for sleep that final night, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Years of training, sacrifice, and dedication had led to a mission that would test every skill she possessed. Tomorrow she would begin the journey to a remote mountain compound where 3 enemy generals would gather, unaware that a sniper was preparing to change the course of the war with 3 carefully aimed shots. The helicopter's rotors cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Below, the landscape rushed past in shades of black and gray. Mountains rose like sleeping giants, their peaks shrouded in mist. In exactly 47 minutes, she would be alone in enemy territory with nothing but her training and determination to keep her alive. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her headset above the engine noise. The insertion point was a small clearing 12 miles from the target compound. Intelligence reports indicated minimal enemy patrol activity in that sector, but Sarah knew that could change without warning. Enemy forces had become increasingly unpredictable in recent months, adapting their tactics to counter Allied operations. Sarah's stomach tightened as the helicopter began its descent. This wasn't her first solo mission, but the stakes had never been higher. 3 enemy generals had caused more damage to Allied forces than entire enemy divisions. Their elimination could shift the balance of power in the entire theater of operations. The pilot's hand signal indicated 2 minutes to insertion. Sarah moved toward the helicopter's open door, feeling the cold mountain air rush against her face. Her equipment pack weighed exactly 63 pounds, every item carefully selected and positioned for easy access. The rifle case was secured across her back, its weight familiar and reassuring. Ground contact was softer than expected. Sarah rolled to absorb the impact, immediately scanning her surroundings for threats. The helicopter's engines faded quickly, leaving only the natural sounds of wind through trees and distant animal calls. She was alone now, 12 miles from her target and 3 days from the most important shots of her career. The first priority was establishing her exact location. GPS coordinates confirmed she was within 50 meters of the planned insertion point. Sarah oriented herself using landmarks visible in the growing daylight, then began moving toward her initial waypoint. The terrain was rocky and steep, requiring careful foot placement to avoid creating noise or leaving obvious tracks. Movement during daylight hours increased the risk of detection, but Sarah needed to cover significant distance before the enemy patrol schedules intensified. Intelligence indicated that enemy forces conducted most of their reconnaissance activities during midday hours, when visibility was optimal. Moving at dawn and dusk provided the best combination of adequate light and reduced enemy activity. Sarah's route took her through dense forest for the first 3 miles. Thick canopy cover provided excellent concealment, but navigation became more challenging. She relied on compass bearings and terrain features to maintain direction, stopping frequently to confirm her position against the detailed maps she had memorized. The second phase of her approach involved crossing an exposed valley, where enemy patrols were more likely. Sarah waited until late afternoon, when lengthening shadows would help break up her silhouette. She moved in short bursts, using available cover and pausing regularly to observe the area through her binoculars. Enemy activity was lighter than intelligence reports had suggested. Sarah observed only 2 patrol units during her valley crossing, both following predictable routes along established trails. Their movement patterns suggested routine security sweeps rather than active searches for infiltrators. This was encouraging, but she remained cautious. Overconfidence had ended more missions than enemy action. As evening approached, Sarah reached her planned overnight position. A small cave provided shelter from weather and concealment from thermal imaging devices. She established a defensive position near the entrance, with clear visibility of potential approach routes. Her rifle was assembled and ready, though she hoped to avoid engagement until reaching the primary target. The first night passed without incident. Sarah maintained a watch schedule that allowed for rest while ensuring early warning of any approaching threats. Her sleep was light and intermittent, trained responses keeping her alert even while resting. Every unusual sound was analyzed and categorized as either natural or potentially dangerous. Morning brought rain, which complicated movement but also provided additional concealment. The sound of raindrops masked small noises that might otherwise reveal Sarah's position. Visibility was reduced, making long-range observation more difficult, but also making it harder for enemy forces to spot her movement. The second day's travel took Sarah through increasingly difficult terrain. Rocky slopes and narrow ledges required careful navigation, especially while carrying a heavy pack and rifle. Several times she was forced to detour around obstacles, adding distance and time to her journey. Progress was slower than planned, but still within acceptable parameters. By afternoon, Sarah had reached a position where she could observe the target compound through her binoculars. The building was exactly as described in intelligence reports, a 3-story concrete structure surrounded by defensive walls and guard towers. She counted at least 20 enemy personnel visible around the perimeter, with more likely inside the building. The compound security arrangements were professional and thorough. Guards followed irregular patrol patterns, making it difficult to predict safe windows for approach. Communication equipment was visible on several towers, indicating sophisticated coordination capabilities. Sarah noted several changes from the intelligence photos, including additional barriers and what appeared to be recently installed detection equipment. Her planned firing position was located on a ridge approximately 800 meters from the compound. The distance was within her optimal range for accurate shooting, while providing multiple escape routes if extraction became necessary. Sarah spent several hours studying the approach route, identifying potential obstacles and alternate paths. The final approach to her firing position required movement during darkness. Sarah waited until well after sunset, when enemy visual observation capabilities would be most limited. She moved slowly and carefully, testing each step before committing her full weight. The terrain was treacherous in darkness with loose rocks and hidden obstacles. Sarah reached her primary shooting position at approximately 3 in the morning. The location provided excellent visibility of the compound's main building, while offering natural concealment among large boulders and scrub vegetation. She immediately began preparing a hide site that would allow her to remain undetected for the next 2 days. Construction of the hide required several hours of careful work. Sarah used natural materials to create a concealment that would blend seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. The position needed to provide protection from weather while allowing clear fields of fire toward the target building. Ventilation was critical to prevent condensation that might fog her scope or reveal her position through thermal signature. As dawn approached on the second day, Sarah settled into her position for the long wait. The compound was already showing signs of activity, with guards changing shifts and vehicles moving through the main gate. She began the patient observation that was the essence of sniper warfare, watching, learning, and preparing for the moment when her targets would appear. Through her scope, Sarah could see the conference room where the 3 generals would meet. Large windows provided clear visibility of the interior, confirming intelligence reports about the location. She measured distances, calculated wind effects, and identified reference points that would help her engage multiple targets quickly and accurately. The waiting began in earnest. Sarah knew that the next 36 hours would test her patience and resolve more than any training exercise ever had. 3 enemy generals were traveling toward this remote compound, unaware that a sniper was already in position, ready to change the course of the war with 3 carefully aimed shots. Sarah's world had shrunk to the narrow view through her rifle scope and the whisper-quiet sounds of the mountain wilderness around her. 36 hours had passed since she settled into her concealed position overlooking the enemy compound. Her body ached from maintaining the same cramped position, but her mind remained sharp and focused. Today, the 3 generals would arrive. The morning brought unexpected weather changes. Dense fog rolled through the valley, reducing visibility to less than 200 meters. Sarah watched through her binoculars as the mist swirled around the compound buildings, occasionally revealing glimpses of guard towers and defensive walls. The fog could work in her favor by concealing muzzle flash, but it might also obscure her targets at the critical moment. Radio chatter from the compound had increased significantly during the night. Sarah's electronic surveillance equipment picked up coded transmissions that suggested important arrivals were imminent. She couldn't understand the enemy language, but the increased frequency and urgency of communications indicated heightened security preparations. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, the fog began to lift. Sarah watched through her scope as the compound gradually became visible. Additional guards had been posted overnight, and she counted at least 30 personnel now visible around the perimeter. 2 armored vehicles had arrived during the darkness, positioned near the main entrance with their weapon systems actively manned. The first convoy appeared on the mountain road at 10:30. Sarah tracked the vehicles through her binoculars as they wound their way up the narrow approach route. 3 black SUVs with military escorts moving in tactical formation with proper spacing and security protocols. Her heart rate increased slightly as she realized the moment she had trained for was finally arriving. General Kozlov emerged from the lead vehicle as the convoy entered the compound. Sarah recognized him immediately from the photographs she had memorized. The heavy-set man moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, gesturing toward the main building while his security detail formed a protective perimeter. He appeared alert and cautious, frequently scanning the surrounding mountains as if sensing potential danger. Sarah adjusted her rifle position minutely, ensuring optimal stability for the shots to come. Her breathing slowed to the steady rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Each breath became deliberate and controlled, preparing her body for the precise muscular coordination required for accurate long-range shooting. The second convoy arrived 40 minutes later. General Hassan stepped out of the middle vehicle, immediately engaging in animated conversation with Kozlov. The 2 men seemed familiar with each other, suggesting previous meetings and established working relationships. Their body language indicated serious discussion, possibly about the military operations that had brought them together. Sarah made final adjustments to her scope settings, accounting for the current atmospheric conditions. Temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure all affected bullet trajectory at extreme distances. Her calculations had to be perfect because there would be no opportunity for correction shots. 3 targets, 3 bullets, executed in rapid succession before enemy security could react. The third convoy was late. Sarah maintained her position as minutes stretched into hours, fighting the natural tendency to shift and relieve muscle tension. Professional snipers understood that patience was as important as marksmanship. Rushing the shot or abandoning position prematurely had ruined more missions than enemy action. General Wang finally arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. His convoy was smaller than the others, consisting of only 2 vehicles with minimal escort. The elderly general moved slowly as he exited his SUV, requiring assistance from his aide to navigate the compound entrance. His apparent frailty was deceiving. Intelligence reports indicated he was one of the most effective enemy commanders despite his age. All 3 targets were now present in the compound. Sarah watched through her scope as the generals and their staffs gathered in the courtyard for brief, informal discussions. Security personnel maintained vigilant watch, but their attention was focused on ground-level approaches rather than the surrounding mountains. This was the advantage of extreme-range shooting. Threats were expected from much closer distances. The meeting was scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock in the conference room on the 2nd floor of the main building. Sarah had studied architectural plans and satellite images until she could visualize the room's layout perfectly. The large windows faced directly toward her position, providing unobstructed lines of sight to the conference table where the generals would sit. At 2:55, movement began toward the main building. Sarah tracked each general through her scope as they climbed the steps and entered the structure. Her breathing became even more controlled as adrenaline began affecting her system. Years of training had taught her to use this natural response constructively, rather than allowing it to degrade performance. The conference room lights came on at exactly 3 o'clock. Through her scope, Sarah could see figures moving inside the room, but window reflections made positive target identification difficult. She waited patiently, knowing that the meeting would eventually require the participants to be seated at the table where she would have clear shots. General Kozlov appeared first in her crosshairs, taking a position at the head of the conference table. His bulk made him an easy target to identify and track. Sarah calculated the precise aiming point that would ensure an instantly fatal shot, compensating for the slight upward angle and crosswind that had developed during the afternoon. General Hassan joined Kozlov at the table, choosing a seat that placed him in profile to Sarah's position. This angle was more challenging but still well within her capabilities. She adjusted her aim point accordingly, taking into account how bullet trajectory would be affected by striking the target from the side rather than straight on. General Wang was the last to take his seat, positioning himself directly across from Kozlov with his back partially toward the window. This was the most difficult shot of the three, requiring precise placement to ensure the bullet would strike vital organs despite the awkward angle. Sarah's training had prepared her for exactly this type of challenging engagement. The range to target was exactly 783 meters. Wind speed was estimated at 5 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature was 62 degrees Fahrenheit with moderate humidity. Sarah's calculations were complete, and her rifle was perfectly zeroed for these conditions. The moment had arrived for the shots that would change the course of the war. Through her scope, Sarah could see all three generals clearly positioned around the conference table. They appeared to be reviewing documents and discussing strategy, completely unaware that a sniper had them in her crosshairs. Their security personnel were positioned around the room's perimeter, but their attention was focused on the documents rather than potential external threats. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger as she made her final breathing adjustments. The first shot had to be perfect because it would alert everyone to the sniper's presence. The second and third shots would need to be fired rapidly before the targets could react or seek cover. Everything depended on the training and preparation of the past 3 years, culminating in the next 30 seconds of action. Time seemed to slow as Sarah's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger. Her breathing had stopped completely, her body locked in perfect stability. Through the scope, General Kozlov was leaning forward over documents on the conference table, presenting an ideal target profile. The crosshairs settled precisely on the center of his chest, accounting for bullet drop and wind drift across 783 meters of mountain air. The rifle's discharge was sharp and clean, the sound echoing across the valley like thunder. Sarah didn't pause to observe the result of her first shot. Her training took over as she smoothly worked the bolt action, chambering a second round while simultaneously shifting her aim toward General Hassan. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds, muscle memory guiding actions she had practiced thousands of times. Hassan was already beginning to react to the sound of the first shot when Sarah's second bullet found its mark. The general had started to rise from his chair, turning toward the window with a confused expression. He never completed the movement. The high-velocity round struck him center mass and he collapsed immediately beside the conference table. Sarah was already acquiring her third target when chaos erupted in the conference room. General Wang had thrown himself toward the floor, but his age and physical limitations slowed his movement. Sarah tracked him through her scope as he attempted to crawl toward cover behind an overturned chair. Her third shot caught him before he could reach safety, ensuring all 3 primary targets had been eliminated. The entire engagement had lasted less than 15 seconds from first shot to last. Sarah immediately began breaking down her position, knowing that enemy forces would be scrambling to locate the source of the gunfire. She had perhaps 10 minutes before organized search teams could reach her general area, and every second counted in the race for survival. Security personnel in the compound were shouting orders and running toward defensive positions. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as guards began firing wildly at the surrounding mountains, having no clear idea where the shots had originated. Their panic worked in her favor, creating confusion that would delay any coordinated response to her actual position. Sarah's rifle was quickly disassembled and secured in its carrying case. All evidence of her presence was carefully removed from the hide site. Empty shell casings were collected, and any disturbed vegetation was arranged to appear natural. Professional snipers understood that survival often depended as much on concealment after the shot as on accuracy during engagement. The escape route led down the back side of the ridge, away from the compound and toward the planned extraction point. Sarah moved as quickly as the terrain allowed, using available cover to break up her silhouette against the sky. Behind her, the sounds of enemy activity were increasing as more personnel joined the search efforts. Radio communications equipment allowed Sarah to contact the extraction team while moving toward the pickup zone. Her report was brief and professional. Mission accomplished. 3 targets eliminated. Moving to extraction point Alpha. Commander Morrison's voice responded immediately, confirming that the helicopter was already en route to the designated landing zone. The descent from the ridge was treacherous, requiring careful foot placement on loose rocks and steep slopes. Sarah's heavy equipment pack made balance more difficult, but she maintained a steady pace. Time was critical now. Every minute of delay increased the chance that enemy forces would expand their search perimeter to include the extraction zone. Helicopter rotors became audible when Sarah was still 2 miles from the landing zone. The sound gave her hope but also increased her urgency. The aircraft's presence would certainly be detected by enemy forces, who would realize that extraction was imminent. If they could delay her arrival at the pickup point, the helicopter might be forced to abort the mission. Enemy search teams were visible on distant ridges, moving in organized patterns that indicated professional military training. Their deployment was more systematic than Sarah had hoped, suggesting that the compound's security forces were better prepared for sniper attacks than intelligence reports had indicated. She would need to use every skill learned in years of training to evade capture. The terrain gradually became less steep as Sarah approached the valley floor where extraction would occur. This area offered less concealment, making her more vulnerable to observation from the surrounding heights. She moved in short rushes between available cover, pausing frequently to observe potential threats through her binoculars. At exactly 4:30, Sarah reached the extraction landing zone. The helicopter was visible in the distance, approaching fast and low to avoid detection. She activated her emergency beacon to guide the aircraft to her exact location, then established a defensive perimeter to cover the pickup operation. Enemy forces had not yet reached the extraction area, but their presence was getting closer. Sarah could hear vehicle engines and radio chatter from multiple directions, indicating that the search was intensifying. The helicopter crew would need to execute a rapid extraction to avoid engagement with pursuing forces. The aircraft touched down briefly, rotors never stopping as Sarah ran toward the open cabin door. Strong hands pulled her aboard as the helicopter immediately lifted off, climbing rapidly to clear the surrounding mountains. Below, muzzle flashes indicated that enemy forces had arrived at the landing zone moments too late. During the flight back to base, Sarah allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of mission completion. 3 enemy generals who had caused countless Allied casualties were no longer a threat. Their elimination would disrupt enemy operations for months, potentially saving thousands of lives in future battles. Commander Morrison was waiting on the landing pad when the helicopter arrived. His expression showed both relief and pride as Sarah reported the mission's success. All primary objectives had been achieved with no friendly casualties, representing a textbook example of precision military operations. The debriefing session lasted several hours as intelligence officers documented every aspect of the mission. Sarah's observations about compound security, enemy response times, and patrol patterns would be valuable for planning future operations. Her detailed reports would help other soldiers who might face similar challenges. Medical examination revealed no injuries despite the physical demands of the 3-day mission. Sarah's conditioning and preparation had been adequate for the challenges she faced. Psychological evaluation showed normal stress responses with no indicators of long-term effects from the combat experience. Recognition for the mission's success came in various forms. Official commendations were placed in Sarah's personnel file, though the classified nature of the operation meant public acknowledgement was impossible. More meaningful was the respect of her fellow soldiers who understood the skill and courage required for such an assignment. Intelligence reports confirmed the strategic impact of eliminating the 3 generals. Enemy operations in the theater showed immediate disruption as command structures struggled to adapt to the sudden leadership void. Supply lines became less efficient, coordination between units deteriorated, and planned offensive operations were postponed indefinitely. Sarah's reputation as an elite sniper was firmly established by the mission's success. She had proven capable of operating independently in hostile territory, while achieving precise results under extreme pressure. Future assignments would likely involve similarly challenging objectives requiring her unique combination of skills. The war continued, but Sarah's contribution had shifted the balance of power significantly. 3 carefully aimed shots had accomplished what entire divisions might have struggled to achieve through conventional combat. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by a single soldier, with the courage and skill to strike at exactly the right moment. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's successful mission, but the ripple effects of her 3 shots continued to reshape the battlefield. Intelligence reports flooding into command headquarters painted a picture of enemy forces in complete disarray. Supply convoys were arriving late or not at all, communication networks had broken down, and entire divisions were operating without clear orders. Commander Morrison found Sarah in the base's shooting range, where she had been spending most of her free time since returning from the mission. Despite the operation's success, she seemed restless, as if the adrenaline of combat had created an addiction that peacetime couldn't satisfy. Her shooting scores remained perfect, but there was an intensity to her practice that suggested she was preparing for something more challenging than routine training. The intelligence briefing that morning had revealed disturbing information. Enemy forces, reeling from the loss of their 3 top generals, had made a desperate decision. They were consolidating their remaining leadership in a single location, hoping that concentrated command would help them regain control of their scattered units. This gathering would include at least 7 high-ranking officers, representing the entire remaining enemy command structure. Sarah listened carefully as Morrison explained the new intelligence. The enemy had chosen an abandoned monastery high in the mountains, a location so remote and difficult to access that they believed it would be impossible for Allied forces to reach. The building was surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides with only a narrow mountain path providing access. It appeared to be the perfect fortress, impregnable to conventional attack. But conventional attack wasn't what Morrison had in mind. The same geographic features that made the monastery defensible also created opportunities for a skilled sniper. The surrounding peaks offered multiple shooting positions, and the isolation that protected the enemy also meant that extraction after an attack would be extremely difficult for them to prevent. The mission would be far more complex than Sarah's previous assignment. 7 targets instead of 3, in a location that would require days of difficult mountain climbing to reach. Weather conditions at that altitude would be harsh and unpredictable. Most challenging of all, the enemy would be expecting another sniper attack after the previous successful mission. Sarah accepted the assignment without hesitation. The opportunity to potentially end the war with a single operation was too important to pass up. If she could eliminate the remaining enemy leadership, their forces might simply collapse from lack of coordination. Thousands of Allied soldiers would return home safely instead of facing months or years of continued fighting. Preparation for this mission required completely different tactics than her previous assignment. The monastery's altitude meant dealing with thin air that would affect both her physical performance and bullet trajectory. Temperature variations between day and night could be extreme, requiring equipment that could function reliably in conditions ranging from freezing to scorching heat. The approach route would take Sarah through some of the most challenging mountain terrain in the region. Steep rock faces, narrow ledges, and unstable scree slopes would test every aspect of her climbing and survival skills. She would need to carry enough supplies for at least a week, including specialized climbing equipment that hadn't been required for her previous mission. Weather forecasts showed a narrow window of opportunity in 10 days, when mountain conditions would be relatively stable. Sarah would need to begin her approach 3 days before the enemy leadership meeting, allowing time to establish a shooting position and wait for optimal conditions. The margin for error was minimal. Delays due to weather or terrain could mean missing the opportunity entirely. Training for the new mission pushed Sarah to her physical and mental limits. High-altitude conditioning exercises helped prepare her body for the reduced oxygen levels she would face. Rock climbing practice on the base's artificial wall couldn't fully replicate the dangers she would encounter, but it helped maintain the specific muscle groups and coordination required for vertical movement. Sarah's rifle required modifications for the extreme conditions she would face. Cold weather could affect the action's reliability, while altitude changes would alter bullet trajectory in ways that needed to be precisely calculated. Special lubricants and materials were used to ensure the weapon would function perfectly, even in sub-freezing temperatures. The selection of ammunition became critical. Each bullet needed to perform consistently across a wide range of environmental conditions. Temperature variations could affect powder burn rates and bullet velocity, while air density changes would influence trajectory. Sarah tested dozens of different loads to find the combination that would deliver reliable accuracy regardless of conditions. Communication equipment required weatherproofing and extended battery life to function during the lengthy mission. Solar charging panels would provide backup power, but reliability in mountain weather was questionable. Emergency signaling devices were included as backups, though the remote location made rescue unlikely if the primary mission failed. Food and water requirements were calculated carefully. Sarah would need to carry everything required for survival during the approach and extraction phases. Dehydrated meals provided necessary nutrition with minimal weight, while water purification tablets allowed her to use natural sources along the route. Every ounce of weight mattered when climbing at altitude. Navigation would rely on GPS when possible, but electronic devices could fail in extreme conditions. Sarah memorized topographic maps of the entire approach route, identifying landmarks and alternate paths that could guide her even without instruments. Compass and altimeter provided backup navigation methods that didn't depend on batteries or satellites. The psychological challenge of this mission exceeded even her previous assignment. Days of solitary climbing, followed by potentially hours of waiting in a concealed position, would test her mental resilience. Sarah worked with base psychologists to develop meditation and focus techniques that would help maintain peak performance throughout the extended operation. Medical supplies included treatments for altitude sickness, frostbite, and injuries that might occur during the mountain approach. Sarah received additional training in self-treatment techniques, since professional medical help would be impossible to reach during the mission. Pain medications were included, but only types that wouldn't impair the mental clarity required for precision shooting. Equipment testing revealed several potential problems that needed solutions. Cold weather made some materials brittle, while condensation could fog optical equipment at critical moments. Sarah developed procedures for protecting her rifle and scope from temperature extremes that might compromise their performance when targets finally appeared. The enemy leadership meeting was confirmed to begin in exactly 1 week. 7 high-ranking officers would gather at the remote monastery to coordinate what might be their final attempt at organized resistance. Intelligence suggested they were planning a desperate offensive that could extend the war for months or even years if successful. Sarah's departure was scheduled for 3 days before the enemy meeting, providing barely enough time to reach the monastery and establish a shooting position. Weather forecasts remained favorable, but mountain conditions could change rapidly and without warning. Success would require not only skill and courage, but also a significant amount of luck. Commander Morrison's final briefing emphasized the mission's importance and danger. This operation could potentially end the war, but it would also be the most hazardous assignment any Allied sniper had ever attempted. Sarah's survival was far from guaranteed, even if the shooting phase of the mission succeeded perfectly. As Sarah made final preparations for departure, she reflected on how much her life had changed since accepting her first sniper assignment. The quiet farm girl who had enlisted 3 years earlier had been replaced by one of the military's most effective weapons. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that could determine the outcome of the entire war. The mountain air cut through Sarah's lungs like frozen knives as she climbed through the pre-dawn darkness. 2 days of grueling ascent had brought her within striking distance of the abandoned monastery, but the final approach would be the most dangerous part of her journey. At 11,000 feet above sea level, every breath was a conscious effort. and the weight of her equipment felt doubled by the thin atmosphere. Below her, enemy security patrols moved along the narrow access road like ants following a predetermined path. Through her binoculars, Sarah counted at least 15 guards positioned around the monastery's perimeter. Their thermal imaging equipment swept the surrounding slopes methodically, searching for exactly the type of threat she represented. The enemy had learned from her previous success and wasn't taking any chances. The monastery itself was a testament to ancient engineering, carved directly into the mountain face over centuries ago. Its stone walls seemed to grow from the rock itself, making it nearly impossible to distinguish where natural formation ended and human construction began. The building's windows were small and positioned high above the valley floor, designed more for defense than comfort. Sarah's chosen shooting position was a narrow ledge approximately 1,200 meters from the monastery's main hall. The distance was at the extreme edge of her effective range, but it was the only location that offered both clear sightlines and reasonable concealment. Getting there would require traversing an exposed rock face where a single misplaced step could mean a fatal fall. The climbing began in earnest as the first hints of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. Sarah moved slowly and deliberately, testing each handhold before committing her full weight. Her rifle case was secured tightly against her back, but its bulk made balance more difficult on the narrow ledges. Every few minutes she paused to rest and observe the monastery for signs of increased security activity. Halfway up the cliff face, Sarah encountered unexpected difficulty. A section of rock that had appeared solid from below proved to be loose shale that crumbled under pressure. She was forced to detour around the unstable area, adding precious time to her ascent. The sun was rising quickly, and she needed to reach concealment before full daylight exposed her to enemy observation. The final 50 feet of climbing tested every skill Sarah had learned in her mountain warfare training. Vertical rock required precise technique and maximum physical effort at an altitude where oxygen was already scarce. Her breathing became labored and muscle fatigue threatened to compromise her grip on the rough stone surfaces. Sarah reached her shooting position just as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, flooding the valley with golden light. She immediately began constructing a hide that would conceal her presence from the enemy thermal imaging equipment. Natural materials combined with specialized camouflage fabrics created a position that would be virtually invisible from the monastery. The view from her position revealed the monastery's layout in perfect detail. The main hall where the enemy leadership would meet occupied the building's central section, with large windows facing directly toward Sarah's location. She could see movement inside as staff prepared for the day's activities, but the important targets had not yet arrived. Enemy security measures were more extensive than intelligence reports had suggested. In addition to the perimeter guards, Sarah observed sniper teams positioned on the monastery's roof and surrounding outbuildings. Their presence indicated that enemy commanders understood the threat she represented and had taken appropriate countermeasures. The first enemy leader arrived at 9:30 in the morning. Sarah recognized General Petrov from intelligence photographs as he emerged from an armored vehicle. The heavy-set commander moved with obvious caution, scanning the surrounding mountains before entering the monastery. His security detail was professional and alert, maintaining overlapping fields of observation. 2 more generals arrived within the next hour, each bringing additional security personnel. Sarah counted at least 40 enemy soldiers now visible around the monastery complex. Their deployment suggested they were prepared for multiple types of attacks, not just the sniper threat she represented. The morning passed slowly as Sarah waited for all 7 target officers to arrive. Through her scope, she occasionally glimpsed figures moving inside the main hall, but positive identification was impossible at such distances. She would need to wait until the meeting began, and all participants were clearly visible before engaging. Weather conditions were deteriorating as afternoon approached. Wind speeds were increasing and clouds were building around the higher peaks. Sarah's calculations for bullet trajectory would need constant adjustment as atmospheric conditions changed. The margin for error at 1,200 meters was minimal even under perfect conditions. The 6th enemy officer arrived just after noon, but the 7th was delayed by what appeared to be vehicle problems on the mountain road. Sarah watched through her binoculars as mechanics worked frantically to repair a disabled truck. The delay was frustrating, but it also gave her more time to study the target area and refine her shooting solutions. General Morrison's voice crackled through Sarah's encrypted radio at 2 o'clock. Intelligence had confirmed that all 7 enemy commanders were now present in the monastery. The meeting was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, providing the opportunity Sarah had been waiting for. Her response was brief and professional. All targets confirmed. Standing by. Sarah began her final preparations as the appointed meeting time approached. Her rifle was perfectly zeroed for the current conditions, and ammunition was arranged for rapid access. Each shot would need to be fired quickly once the engagement began, since the enemy would seek cover immediately after the first bullet impact. The conference room lights came on at exactly 2:30. Through her high-powered scope, Sarah could see figures taking positions around a large table. The distance made positive identification challenging, but she had memorized each target's distinctive characteristics well enough to distinguish them, even at extreme range. General Petrov was the first to sit down, choosing a position at the head of the table that made him clearly visible through the main window. Sarah acquired him in her crosshairs and began the breathing routine that would prepare her for the shot. 1,197 meters, accounting for the slight upward angle and crosswind from the northwest. The other generals joined Petrov around the table over the next few minutes. Sarah identified each one methodically, calculating the precise aim points that would ensure immediate elimination. The arrangement of targets was favorable, with clear sight lines to all 7 officers. Her success would depend on speed and accuracy during the critical 30 seconds, when all targets were exposed. As documents were distributed around the conference table, Sarah made her final wind calculations. Atmospheric conditions had stabilized, providing optimal shooting weather. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that preceded every shot, and her finger moved to the trigger. 7 enemy commanders were about to discover that their remote mountain fortress offered no protection from a determined sniper. The moment of decision had arrived. Sarah's crosshairs settled on General Petrov's chest as she began the trigger squeeze that would initiate the most challenging shooting sequence of her career. 7 shots at extreme range, fired in rapid succession before enemy security forces could react. Everything she had learned in years of training would be tested in the next minute of combat. Sarah's first shot shattered the mountain silence like thunder rolling across the peaks. General Petrov never knew what hit him as the high-velocity round found its mark with devastating precision. The sound of the rifle's discharge echoed off the monastery walls, creating a series of reverberations that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Without pausing to observe the results, Sarah worked the bolt action and shifted to her second target. General Volkov was already beginning to react, his military instincts sensing danger even before his conscious mind processed what was happening. He started to rise from his chair, but Sarah's second bullet caught him center mass before he could complete the movement. The conference room erupted into chaos as the remaining enemy officers realized they were under sniper attack. General Kozlowski threw himself sideways, attempting to reach cover behind an overturned table. Sarah tracked his movement through her scope, leading the target slightly to compensate for his momentum. Her third shot stopped his desperate dive midway to the floor. Enemy security forces were already responding to the threat, their training evident in the speed of their reaction. Muzzle flashes appeared from multiple positions around the monastery as guards began firing at the surrounding mountains. They had no clear target, but their suppressive fire was intended to disrupt any follow-up shots while other teams moved to locate the sniper's position. General Antonov had found partial cover behind a stone pillar, but his position still offered Sarah a clear shot at his exposed shoulder and head. Her fourth bullet struck him as he attempted to peer around the pillar's edge, eliminating another key enemy commander. 3 targets remained, but they had all found some form of concealment within the conference room. Sarah's advantage was quickly disappearing as enemy counter-sniper teams began coordinating their response. She could see soldiers moving across the monastery rooftops, deploying equipment that would help them locate her position. Once they identified her hiding spot, concentrated fire would make it impossible to continue the engagement. General Markov broke cover suddenly, running toward the conference room's exit in a desperate attempt to escape. Sarah led him carefully, calculating his speed and direction before firing her 5th shot. The bullet caught him just before he reached the doorway, sending him sprawling across the floor only meters from safety. 2 targets remained, but both had found excellent concealment behind overturned furniture, and structural elements within the room. Sarah could occasionally glimpse movement through her scope, but clear shots were no longer available. Time was running out as enemy forces closed in on her position from multiple directions. A mortar round exploded 50 meters below Sarah's position, showering her hide with rock fragments and dust. The enemy had identified her general location and was beginning to bracket her position with indirect fire. She had perhaps 2 minutes before accurate fire would make her position untenable. General Fedorov made a critical mistake. Exposing himself briefly as he attempted to reach a radio unit on the conference table, Sarah's sixth shot caught him in the upper torso, eliminating the second-to-last target on her list. Only General Smirnov remained alive among the enemy leadership, and he had found excellent cover behind a massive stone fireplace. Enemy sniper teams were now firing at Sarah's position. With increasing accuracy, bullets struck the rocks around her hide, sending dangerous fragments in all directions. She pressed herself lower against the stone ledge, making herself as small a target as possible while maintaining observation of the conference room. Smirnov remained hidden behind the fireplace, apparently content to wait for his security forces to eliminate the sniper threat. Sarah could see only small portions of his uniform through gaps in the stone structure, but none offered a clear shot at vital areas. She would need to be patient and wait for him to make a mistake. More mortar rounds impacted near Sarah's position, each one closer than the last. The enemy had her general location pinpointed and was systematically destroying potential hiding spots. She estimated less than a minute before direct hits would force her to abandon the position or risk being killed by the bombardment. A helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, moving fast and low toward the monastery. Sarah initially thought it might be an enemy reinforcement, but the aircraft's markings identified it as Allied. Commander Morrison had positioned extraction assets nearby, ready to respond if the opportunity arose. General Smirnov apparently decided that waiting was too dangerous. He began moving toward the conference room's rear exit, using furniture and architectural features to mask his movement. Sarah tracked him patiently through her scope, waiting for the moment when he would be forced to expose himself completely. The opportunity came as Smirnov approached the doorway. For just a moment, he had to step clear of the fireplace's protection to reach the exit. Sarah's seventh and final shot was perfect, striking the last enemy general before he could escape. The entire remaining enemy leadership had been eliminated in less than 3 minutes of intense combat. Sarah immediately began breaking down her position as enemy fire intensified around her location. The mission was complete, but survival was far from guaranteed. She would need to descend the cliff face under fire, then reach an extraction point several miles away through terrain crawling with enemy search teams. The descent was terrifying, with bullets striking the rock face around her as she rappelled down the mountain. Several times she was forced to take cover in small crevices, waiting for enemy fire to slacken before continuing her downward movement. Her rope work had to be perfect because there would be no second chances at this altitude. Allied artillery began impacting around the monastery as Sarah reached the base of the cliff. Commander Morrison had coordinated supporting fires to suppress enemy forces and provide cover for her escape. The bombardment created confusion and forced enemy soldiers to take cover instead of pursuing the fleeing sniper. Sarah's route to the extraction point took her through a maze of rocky valleys and narrow defiles. Enemy search teams were visible on several ridges, but the broken terrain provided excellent concealment for someone with her training. She moved in short rushes between covered positions, using the artillery bombardment to mask the sounds of her movement. The extraction helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, hovering over the designated landing zone while Sarah ran across the final stretch of open ground. Enemy soldiers were visible in the distance, but their accurate fire was suppressed by door gunners providing covering fire from the aircraft. Strong hands pulled Sarah aboard as the helicopter lifted off immediately, climbing rapidly to clear the surrounding peaks. Below, the monastery was burning from the artillery impacts and enemy forces appeared to be in complete disarray. The elimination of their entire remaining leadership had achieved exactly the strategic impact that planners had hoped for. During the flight back to base, Sarah reflected on what she had accomplished. 7 shots at extreme range had potentially ended a war that might otherwise have continued for years. Thousands of soldiers on both sides would return home to their families instead of dying in prolonged combat operations. Commander Morrison was waiting at the landing pad with a smile that spoke volumes about the mission's strategic importance. Intelligence reports were already confirming the collapse of enemy command structures throughout the theater. Without leadership to coordinate their actions, enemy forces were surrendering or simply abandoning their positions. The war officially ended 6 days later, when the remaining enemy commanders signed an unconditional surrender. Sarah's marksmanship had accomplished what entire armies might have struggled to achieve through conventional warfare. 7 carefully aimed shots had broken the enemy's will to continue fighting. Recognition for Sarah's achievements came in various forms, though much of it remained classified due to the sensitive nature of her missions. What mattered most was the knowledge that her skills had been used to save lives and bring peace to a war-torn region. Sarah returned to training and routine duties, but she knew that her life had been permanently changed by the experiences of the past months. She had proven herself capable of extraordinary achievements under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The quiet farm girl who had enlisted years earlier had become one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. The skills she had developed would remain sharp through constant practice, ready for deployment whenever and wherever they might be needed again. Sarah understood that peace was often maintained by individuals willing to fight when diplomacy failed, and she was prepared to answer that call whenever her country needed her unique talents.